California sunset painted the sprawling windows of their modern Los Angeles home in hues of burnt orange and deep violet, but the light did little to warm the cold, expansive silence between Clara and Ethan. They had a life that looked perfect from the outside. A house in the exclusive hills of Brentwood, 2 luxury cars, and a marriage that had spanned 12 years. All built on Ethan's relentless work ethic as a tech executive and Clara's exquisite talent for making everything look effortless. He provided the foundation. She provided the facade. Lately, the facade was starting to crack. Ethan was a creature of habit and routine. He arrived home at 7:15 p.m. without fail, after a day spent conquering server farms and quarterly reports. His presence was a solid, dependable anchor, yet increasingly, it felt more like a heavy weight. He'd exchange a quick, dry kiss with Clara, his lips cool and tasting faintly of the artisanal coffee from his downtown office, then retreat to his study to review market projections, his eyes glued to the glowing screen until midnight. He wasn't malicious, just absent. His ambition was a third party in their marriage, one that demanded all his attention, leaving Clara with a life that was both materially rich and emotionally bankrupt. Clara, a former interior designer who had traded blueprints for charity galas, spent her days curating their social life in their home, a role she had come to resent. She walked through their impeccably decorated rooms, her designer heels clicking on the polished concrete floors, and felt like a well-dressed ghost in her own museum. She was 37, beautiful, intelligent, and deeply, desperately bored. Her boredom was a slow poison, making her irritable, restless, and judgmental of the man who had given her everything except his time. "Dinner is on the island," she said one Tuesday evening, her voice perfectly even, devoid of any real inflection. She didn't bother to go to his study door anymore. He would hear her, or he wouldn't. It made no difference to the predictable silence that followed. Ethan emerged 10 minutes later, already wearing the slight, preoccupied frown that was his default expression. "Thanks, Clara. Did you get the confirmation for the Hawaii trip next month?" he asked, grabbing a piece of grilled salmon from the plate. "Yes, everything is booked." "Private villa, the usual. Did you manage to look at the estimate for the kitchen remodel I sent you?" she countered, knowing the answer already. He didn't look up from his phone. "Not yet. I had 3 back-to-back calls that bled into each other." "Just put it on the shared drive. I'll get to it this weekend." His tone was dismissive, classifying her request as a trivial chore in his grand, high-stakes world. "It's been on the shared drive for 2 weeks. "Ethan," she said, her voice dropping slightly, a subtle sign of the mounting frustration he was too self-absorbed to notice. "Then it can wait another few days. The Luminous deal is hitting a snag, and that's a 7-figure problem, honey. A new granite countertop is not." He finished his salmon in 3 quick bites, put his empty plate down, and was already halfway back to the study before she could respond. The hollow sound of the study door closing behind him was a final, cold punctuation mark on their interaction. That night, Clara stood on their balcony, staring out at the city lights twinkling below, each one representing a different, vibrant life she wasn't a part of. She felt an urgent, electric need for something to happen, something to shatter the glass case perfection of their existence. She needed to feel desired, seen, and, most importantly, alive. Her escape began subtly, innocently enough, with a new client. Clara had volunteered to help organize a major arts fundraising event for a local nonprofit. The nonprofit's media liaison was a man named Julian Hayes. Julian was an artist himself, a photographer with a studio in a revitalized industrial part of downtown. He was everything Ethan was not, relaxed, creative, and utterly present in every conversation. He wore frayed jeans and linen shirts, smelled faintly of turpentine and sandalwood, and had a smile that crinkled the corners of his warm, espresso-colored eyes. Their initial meetings were strictly professional, held over lattes in bustling, artsy cafes that Ethan would never set foot in. Julian needed help structuring the event's visual narrative. Clara needed a distraction. They talked about color palettes, guest lists, and sponsorship tiers. But slowly, the conversation shifted. "You have an incredible eye, Clara," Julian said to her one afternoon, his gaze intense as he studied her over the rim of his coffee mug. "It's wasted on just coordinating table settings. You see the story in things. Why did you stop designing?" The question startled her. No one, certainly not Ethan, had asked her about her work in years. "Life got in the way," she murmured, a faint, bitter taste in her mouth. The house, the travel, it became easier to manage than to create. Easier isn't always better, Julian replied, his voice soft but resonant. It's a shame to cage a hawk. He didn't offer to rescue her or analyze her marriage. He simply acknowledged the part of her that Ethan had dismissed. The project grew more complex, demanding more of her time. Soon she was driving down to Julian's studio, a cavernous space filled with giant prints and the scent of developing chemicals. It was messy, chaotic, and wonderfully real, the antithesis of her sterile Brentwood home. She loved watching him work, the focused intensity in his eyes as he framed a shot. One afternoon, Julian was showing her a series of candid black and white photos he'd taken in Venice. He leaned close, his arm brushing hers as he pointed to a detail in the photo. "The isolation here," he whispered, his breath warm near her ear. "It's beautiful, but it's sharp, isn't it?" The casual, accidental touch sent a jolt through her, a rush of blood and awareness that she hadn't felt in what felt like a lifetime. She pulled back slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs, a mix of fear and exhilarating novelty washing over her. I should go," she stammered, gathering her designer handbag a little too quickly. Julian didn't press her. He simply stepped back, his hands tucked casually in his pockets, his expression open and understanding. "Call me when you've reviewed the final press kit," he said, his smile genuine. The next day she told Ethan she was spending the evening at Kendra's house, reviewing final RSVPs for the gala. Ethan, as usual, simply nodded, preoccupied. "Don't stay out too late. The early flight to New York is going to be brutal." He was leaving for a 3-day business trip. Clara drove to Julian's studio. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that makes every glance, every silence feel significant. They started by reviewing the press kit, but their eyes kept meeting, holding for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Julian put a slow song on the vintage turntable in the corner. "Too formal in this space," he said, pushing the papers aside. "Let's just look at the light." He led her to a large, empty wall where a single spotlight cast a dramatic pool of golden light. "You see how the shadow falls? It only exists because the light is so specific." Clara stood in the center of the light, the silence humming between them. Julian slowly lifted his camera, a vintage Leica, and framed her face. He didn't take a photo. He just looked at her, truly looked at her, his usual easy confidence replaced by a raw, compelling vulnerability. "Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I can't pretend this is about the nonprofit anymore." She didn't answer with words. She simply closed the distance between them, and the world outside the studio, the Brentwood house, the charity galas, the absent husband, ceased to exist. The kiss was not frantic or desperate, but a slow, deliberate act of reawakening. His hands framed her face, his thumbs gently caressing her cheekbones, as if he were memorizing her features. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen, not as an extension of a successful man's life, but as a desired woman. The moment was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. She knew, with a sinking, irreversible certainty, that she had just crossed a boundary she could never uncross. The boredom was gone, replaced by a reckless, thrilling fear. She stayed at the studio until the early hours of the morning, talking and touching, sharing a bottle of cheap Bordeaux, leaving only when the city outside was beginning to stir. Julian walked her to her car, his hand lingering on her arm. "This complicates everything," he whispered. "I know," Clara replied, her voice shaky. But as she drove home through the deserted streets, a small, defiant voice in her mind contradicted her. "This makes everything simple. This is what alive feels like." Ethan was already gone for the airport by the time she walked in. A note was stuck to the refrigerator, "NYC, back Friday. Call me if it's an emergency." Clara crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin. She went upstairs, took a long hot shower, scrubbing away the smell of his cologne, but allowing the faint, earthy scent of sandalwood that Julian wore to linger. She felt guilty, yes, but the guilt was a distant theoretical concept, easily overshadowed by the visceral memory of Julian's touch. She looked at her reflection, and for the first time in years, she didn't see a ghost. She saw a woman with a secret, and that secret felt like a suit of armor. Over the next few weeks, the affair became her new routine, her secret life unfolding in the quiet, overlooked corners of the city. Lunches that extended into late afternoons, charity meetings that took place in a small rented room Julian kept for special photo shoots, hidden away on the top floor of an old brick building. Clara found herself analyzing every little detail, every text message from Julian, living for the brief moments of real connection. One afternoon, while Ethan was in a major board meeting, Clara found herself in Julian's studio, lying on a worn leather couch, the late afternoon sun streaming through the skylight. Julian was sketching her, his brow furrowed in concentration. "He doesn't touch you anymore, does he?" Julian asked, not looking up from his charcoal pad. Clara was taken aback. "What makes you say that?" "The way you flinch sometimes when I come up behind you, like you're not used to physical contact. And the dress, the armor you wear. It's expensive, but it's a shield." She sat up, crossing her arms instinctively. "Ethan is busy. He's under a lot of pressure. He's building an empire, Julian. My husband is formidable." She used the word formidable as a defense, both for Ethan and for her choice to marry him. Julian finally looked up, his charcoal-smudged hand resting on his knee. "Formidable or just distant? The difference is important, Clara. One is a choice to excel. The other is a choice to disappear." His words hit her with the force of an actual blow. He had articulated the core emptiness she refused to acknowledge. That night, she drove back to Brentwood, the exhilaration of the affair mixed with a sharp, terrifying clarity. She found Ethan in the study, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his 3 monitors. He was running a slight fever and was complaining about an impending systems crash. "I'm going to bed," she announced, standing in the doorway. "Okay, good night, honey. Tell the housekeeper to order more of that protein powder I like, will you?" he said, his eyes never leaving the screen. Clara stood there for a beat longer, waiting for a look, a question, a plea for company. Nothing came. She watched his profile, the intensity, the complete, utter commitment to his work, and the love she once felt for him felt like a faded photograph. She walked away, not to the bedroom, but to the kitchen, where she poured herself a glass of wine. She opened her phone and a new text message from Julian flashed on the screen. "The hawk is flying." Clara smiled, a genuine private smile she hadn't given Ethan in years. She had found her release, and in doing so she had unleashed something dangerous, something that was beginning to consume her life and her marriage. She knew deep down that this wouldn't end in a quiet, amicable separation. The stakes were too high, the secrets too volatile. The empire Ethan was building was about to be rocked, and she was holding the match. The next chapter, she realized, would be messy, public, and utterly irreversible. The anticipation, the danger, was an intoxicating rush, and she was too far gone to stop. She was no longer a ghost. She was an agent of chaos. The honeymoon phase of Clara's affair with Julian was rapidly giving way to the grinding reality of maintaining 2 separate lives. The exhilaration she initially felt was now tinged with a constant metallic anxiety. She had become an expert at deception, inventing elaborate stories about committee meetings, museum acquisitions, and late-night charity calls. She spoke the lies with such practiced ease that she often caught herself believing them. Ethan, oblivious in his digital fortress, was too focused on his $50 million luminous deal to notice the subtle shift in his wife. He noticed things on a grand scale: stock market fluctuations, geopolitical tensions, server downtime. But the small, intimate seismic shifts happening right under his nose went completely unregistered. His distraction was Clara's shield, but it was also a continuous insult, fueling her justification for the affair. One evening, Ethan arrived home an hour later than usual, looking visibly stressed. He dropped his briefcase with a heavy thud in the marble foyer and loosened his tie, an act of rare, visible exhaustion. "Long day?" Clara asked, attempting a tone of wifely concern she no longer truly felt. "A disaster, actually," he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Luminous is trying to renegotiate the terms last minute. They're playing hardball, leveraging some technicality in the data governance clause. It means another week of 18-hour days for me, maybe a trip to Seattle." Clara poured him a glass of scotch, a domestic gesture that felt utterly foreign. "I'm sorry, Ethan, that sounds awful." "It is," he said, taking a large swallow. "But it's life, Clara. Someone has to build the infrastructure, you know. Someone has to be the architect, the one who manages the complexity." It's not glamorous, but it keeps all this. He gestured vaguely around their luxurious living space. Running. He looked at her then. Truly looked at her for the first time in days, his eyes unfocused, seeing her more as a calming fixture than a person. I appreciate you holding down the fort. What are you up to tomorrow? Lunch with. Who is it, Veronica? No, it's a meeting with Julian Hayes about the final gala auction items, Clara corrected, her heart giving a nervous flutter at the mention of Julian's name. She was surprised she hadn't flinched. The lie was becoming her truth. We're coordinating the catalog proofs. It's an all-afternoon thing. Julian, Ethan repeated, his mind already drifting back to data governance. Right, good. Just make sure the final list is impeccable. The Vanderbilts are attending, and their donation is key. Clara watched him retreat to the study to make a quick emergency call, and the resentment boiled over. He doesn't even remember the name of my closest friend, but he remembers the name of the most important potential donor at my event. She was a means to an end, a social conduit, a beautifully packaged distraction from his real life. Julian, in contrast, remembered the exact moment she told him about her grandmother's silver locket and the specific brand of Earl Grey tea she drank. The next day, Clara was in Julian's private photo loft. It was a sun-drenched space, far less chaotic than his main studio, and it had become their sanctuary. They weren't just lovers. They were collaborators in her escape. Julian had taken to photographing her, candid shots that captured a rawness she shielded from the world. When are you going to tell him? Julian asked, his voice low as he studied her profile through his lens. Clara stiffened. She was wearing one of his oversized white shirts, her expensive silk dress folded neatly on a nearby chair. Tell him what? That I'm done living in a spreadsheet? That this is real, Clara? That you're leaving? He lowered the camera. You deserve a life where you don't have to lie about where you are. I deserve a life where I don't have to check the traffic reports to make sure his jet isn't landing early. It's not that simple, Julian, she snapped, getting defensive. Ethan and I have 12 years. We have the house, the accounts, the social contracts. He's not just a man. He's a financial institution. You don't just send a memo saying you're withdrawing funds. You make it sound like an acquisition, not a divorce, Julian said, his tone softening with disappointment. He walked over and sat beside her, gently taking her hand. Look, I know he's wealthy, but he's also an absentee husband. That's abandonment. You don't have to stay because you're scared of the paperwork. Clara pulled her hand back, suddenly cold. You don't understand the level of control he has, Julian. He's meticulous. He handles all the finances, every utility, every insurance policy. He likes complexity because he's the only one who can manage it. He designed it that way. That evening, as Ethan prepared for his trip to Seattle, she decided to test the waters of his control. She had seen how the mention of suspicious activity in the rival story had crippled the cheating wife. She needed to know what defenses she had, what vulnerabilities he had. I tried to pay the gardener this morning, but my card was declined, she said casually, watching him pack his sleek, silver suitcase. Ethan didn't miss a beat. Which card? The personal Amex is set to a lower daily limit. Didn't you read the email I sent last month about the new security protocols? No, I missed it. The joint account card. It was embarrassing, Ethan. He sighed, an exaggerated world-weary sound. Clara, I set up a separate bank for the household expenses, linked to the business account, precisely so you wouldn't have to worry about the main investment portfolio. Your card must have expired. I'll call the bank's private line tomorrow from Seattle and sort it out. You know I have to manage the accounts tightly. Fraud is a major risk at my level. He zipped his suitcase, sealing the conversation and his emotional distance. He kissed her on the forehead, a dry, familial gesture. Be good. I'll call you from the hotel when I get a moment. Try not to overspend on those auction items. I won't, she replied, her voice cool. But inside, a tiny seed of fear had been planted. He hadn't just managed the money. He had compartmentalized it, creating a financial maze that only he had the map to. His security measures were also his methods of control. While Ethan was in Seattle, battling the luminous deal, Clara went into action. She knew his desktop computer held everything. She remembered he had once said his password was an elegant mathematical equation, derived from their wedding date, a prime number, and his mother's birth year. It took her 4 tense hours armed with a cocktail of anxiety and adrenaline, but she finally cracked it. The password wasn't a prime number. It was the name of his first successful startup, followed by his lucky number. It was a digital ego trip. Once inside, the sheer volume of data was overwhelming, but Clara, the bored wife, was also a highly organized former designer. She navigated his files with a cold, focused determination. What she found was more unsettling than she expected. Ethan wasn't just managing their finances. He was micromanaging her. First, she found the financial documents. Their marriage was not a 50-50 partnership. Almost every asset, the house, the investment accounts, the brokerage funds, was held in a complex web of trusts and corporations where Ethan was the sole beneficiary and majority shareholder. Her name was on the mortgage, making her equally responsible for the debt, but her ownership percentage in the actual equity was negligible. He had designed a financial foundation that was solid for him and precarious for her. Then she found the other files. Tucked away in a folder labeled Personal Security Audit were a log of all her shared credit card statements with restaurants, shopping trips, and even the occasional visit to a day spa highlighted. Next to the highlighted items were notes, justification needed, or above threshold. A detailed log of the mileage on her SUV, cross-referenced with her calendar. He had been tracking her routine for months, not out of suspicion, but out of a need for data completeness. A folder titled Prenup Review. She opened it, her hands shaking. It wasn't a review. It was a draft of an updated post-nuptial agreement, even more restrictive than their original, designed to protect his new assets from any unforeseen circumstances or dissolution of the marital estate. The deepest cut, however, came from a series of saved text message exchanges with his business partner, Marcus. The messages, spanning the last year, were not about market data, but about Clara. Marcus: how's the home front? Ethan: quiet. Clara's planning another event. Keeps her busy, keeps her out of my hair. Good for the brand. Marcus: need to keep the facade solid. The investors like the stable family man image. Ethan: exactly. She's high maintenance, but she understands the part. As long as she has a cause and a credit limit, she's manageable. Manageable. The word settled over Clara like a thick, toxic fog. She wasn't his partner, his love, or even his friend. She was a line item on his balance sheet, a strategic hire for his personal brand. She had been nothing more than a beautiful, expensive asset. And he viewed her with the same detached necessity as the advanced security system protecting their home. The anger was so intense it was almost physical. It was no longer about the thrill of Julian. It was about revenge against this cold, calculated betrayal. Ethan hadn't just been absent. He had been contemptuous and controlling. He was the architect and she was just a brick in his wall. Clara downloaded everything: financial documents, the security audit, the text messages, onto a heavily encrypted drive she had bought that morning. She locked her husband's computer and returned it to its original state. The time for fear was over. The time for battle had begun. She knew she couldn't face him with this immediately. She needed a plan. She called Julian, her voice tight with a newfound, terrifying resolve. "I need your help with something that has nothing to do with auction items," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I need an escape route, Julian. And I need someone who can work outside of Ethan's network." "I'm listening," Julian responded immediately, his voice dropping into the serious, protective tone that she had come to rely on. "I found his files. He's cornered me financially. He thinks I'm too stupid to notice. He called me manageable." Her voice was shaking, not with fear, but with white-hot rage. "I want to file for divorce, Julian, but I want him to know that the infrastructure he built is about to collapse. I need a wrecking ball." "I know a lawyer," Julian said after a moment's pause. "A bulldog. Specializes in taking down these tech titans. We meet tomorrow morning. My treat." "No more lying, Clara. Let's make this real." Clara hung up the phone, her hand resting on the encrypted drive. She walked through her beautiful gilded prison, looking at the modern cold art and the designer furniture. It was all a lie, a set piece in Ethan's carefully crafted world. She was going to burn it down, piece by piece, not just to get out, but to ensure that the architect finally learned what it felt like when the foundation gave way. He saw her as manageable. She would prove to him that she was, in fact, the most formidable risk he had ever taken. The game had changed from a clandestine romance to a war for survival. The first strike had been made, and the counter-strike would be devastating. Clara and Julian met the next morning in a discreet coffee shop miles from Brentwood. Julian arrived with an immaculately dressed woman named Sloane Keller, a family law attorney whose reputation for ruthlessly dismantling high-net-worth tech divorces was legendary. Sloane didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy. Clara laid out the evidence, the complex network of trusts and shell corporations, the manageable comment, the mileage log, and the draft of the post-nup. Sloane didn't flinch. He's an infrastructure architect, not a lawyer. He tried to engineer a legal framework outside of the law, which is often easier to dismantle than a simple emotional split, Sloane stated, her voice crisp and efficient. The key here is twofold: contempt of the marital estate and financial abuse. His security audits and the restrictive trusts, while seemingly legal, demonstrate a systematic effort to marginalize your marital contribution and corner assets. We can paint the picture of a marriage where you were an unpaid, highly monitored employee, not an equal partner. What about Julian? Clara asked, hesitant for the first time. Doesn't the affair weaken my position? Sloane gave a dry, professional smile. In a no-fault state like California, infidelity is often a moral issue, not a legal one, unless it involves dissipation of marital assets. Did you buy Julian a car? Fund his studio? No, Clara confirmed. He's an artist. We split the cost of the hotel rooms, and I only ever bought him a few bottles of wine. Excellent, Sloane replied. Then it's a non-issue. Your husband, however, was so busy tracking your mileage that he failed to secure his own empire. We have evidence of his financial manipulations and his expressed contempt for you. That is our wrecking ball. The plan was simple, brutal, and precise. They would strike immediately upon Ethan's return, filing the petition before he could recover from his business trip fatigue. That afternoon, Clara quietly executed the first phase of their strategy. Knowing Ethan's security protocols, she logged into his primary work email through a secure, anonymous browser she'd learned about from Julian, and forwarded the entire personal security audit folder, along with the contemptuous texts with Marcus, to 3 key recipients: Marcus, the head of HR at Ethan's company, and most crucially, the lead attorney for the Luminous deal. She didn't add a message. The documents spoke for themselves. The architect's foundation of trust was about to crumble. Ethan returned late on Friday evening, exhausted but triumphant. He was humming a tuneless song as he entered the house. The Luminous deal is done, he announced, dropping his luggage. I closed it. Signed the papers on the tarmac. We are officially up $50 million. He looked at Clara, his face flushed with the kind of self-satisfaction she used to find attractive, but now only found sickening. Get the good champagne, honey. We need to celebrate my win. Clara stood in the center of the living room, a marble-top table separating them. She was wearing a simple black dress, no makeup, no jewelry, shedding the manageable wife's uniform. There's nothing to celebrate. Ethan, she said, her voice steady and unnervingly calm. He paused, a glass of water halfway to his lips. What? What is it? Did the housekeeper forget the dry cleaning again? I'll call them. It's not an emergency. It's not the dry cleaning, she said. The papers were served 20 minutes ago. She nodded toward the small stack of legal documents resting neatly on the antique Italian side table. I filed for divorce. Ethan's triumphant smile dissolved, replaced by a look of bewildered shock, as if she had just recited code in an obsolete language. Divorce? Clara, don't be ridiculous. Is this about the countertops? I told you I'd look at the estimate. This is about the contempt, Ethan. It's about being manageable, she stated, watching him carefully. It's about the financial maze you built to protect yourself from your high-maintenance wife. It's about being an asset on your personal balance sheet. He walked over to the side table, his movements slow and clumsy. He picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the first page, his billion-dollar brain struggling to process a threat he hadn't modeled. You can't do this, he whispered, finally looking up. His face was pale. I control everything. You don't know how the accounts are structured, Clara. You have no legal standing. I know exactly how they're structured, she countered. I have copies of every file in your personal security audit and every Shell Corporation document. I know about the post-nup draft, and I have the text messages where you and Marcus discussed my role as a stable facade. I filed for dissolution based on financial abuse and emotional abandonment. Before he could process the full meaning of her words, his phone buzzed. Then his watch. He glanced down, his eyes widening. "Luminous is holding up the wire transfer," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "And Marcus is asking why his name is all over a legal document. That's because I sent the audit and the text logs to Marcus. You're HR director and Luminous's counsel," Clara explained. A cold, hard satisfaction filling her. I wanted them to know who the real risk factor is. The man who micromanages his wife's day spa visits might also be overlooking significant compliance issues in a $50 million deal. The one thing people like you can't manage is reputation risk. Ethan staggered back, gripping the edge of the marble table for support. "You think you're smart, Clara? You think you can out-engineer me? You just cost me millions. I'll fight this until you have nothing but the dress on your back. I'll ruin you. The difference between us, Ethan, is that you built a complex infrastructure to keep me out, and I just brought the wrecking ball," she said. "Your lawyer will call mine Sloan Keller. She has everything. As for ruining me, I'm already free. I have a life that is real, not just high value. Where will you go?" he demanded, his eyes flashing with fury and desperation. "Back to your worthless friends? Back to your pathetic design hobby?" "I'll go to a place where I'm seen as a woman, not a status symbol," Clara replied. "And you should worry less about my whereabouts and more about the SEC filings Sloan has prepared." "You underestimated the person you dismissed as manageable, Ethan. You forgot that sometimes. The seemingly simple piece of furniture is the one holding the room together." She picked up her small travel bag, already packed and waiting near the door. It contained only essentials: her passport, Julian's small sketchbook filled with her portraits, and the encrypted drive. "Enjoy the celebration, architect," she said, before turning and walking toward the door. The heavy front door closed behind her, not with a hollow thud, but with a sound that felt final and absolute. She didn't look back at the perfect cold house. Julian was waiting for her a block away in his old dented pickup truck. She got in, the passenger seat smelling of old canvas and new beginnings. Julian didn't ask what happened. He simply started the truck. "Where to?" he asked, his hand gently touching hers. "Anywhere that doesn't feel like a balance sheet," Clara replied, finally letting out the breath she'd been holding for 12 years. As they drove away from the dazzling, deceptive lights of Brentwood, she looked at the city, no longer as a ghost, but as a survivor. She had been the perfectly managed asset, and she had become the agent of her own liberation, leaving the architect of her prison standing alone in the ruins of his carefully constructed life. The new beginning was uncertain, but for the first time, it was entirely her own.